Hey guys, Jay here. Welcome to Eons of Battle. I have a massive collection of miniatures and almost all of it makes sense. I have some armies for 40k, tons and tons of kill teams, bunch of Malifaux, bunch of Star Wars Legion. Everything makes sense and is there for a reason. But then, as you delve really deep into my collection of stuff, there are some weird little things, and I want to talk about the weird little things, because sort of those are the most meaningful to me. They have a history, and that history is very, very meaningful to me. It doesn't make them valuable miniatures. Actually, if anything, it hurts their value, but I find them really, really fun to have in my collection. And you know what? Let's get the most embarrassing one out of the way first. This is Cultist Chan. And man, Cultist Chan, the reason that I have this model is because I grew up with the 1D4chan page. I read every single article. That was the place to go for your 40k fix. It had beautiful write-ups of all of the factions in the game, every single product that came out, anything that was going on, and it was all written by complete losers. Which is and was who I am. I loved it. It was a place for weird, nerdy outcasts who made fun of bronies while being huge bronies themselves, arguing, being rude, being mean, but all coming together to just put tons and tons of love into this weird little tabletop game called Warhammer. It was beautiful. It was all about 5th edition, a little bit of 6th edition. It sort of started to die in 7th edition. It's kind of gone now. It barely exists. A lot of the amazing stuff that was there isn't there anymore. It's changed hands. It's barely updated to run on modern stuff, but I loved it. And Cultist Chan kind of became the mascot for 1D4chan. I loved it. I remember in high school using the school's printers to print off like every single page for these beautiful write-ups that they would do on each faction of 40k. I remember printing out all 65 pages of the Chaos Space Marine army write-up, and like the printer just kept going and going and going. And we were in the computer lab to be like writing essays for class, so I wasn't supposed to be doing this. And I remember just like waiting at the printer, but then it kept going and kept going and kept going. So I kind of like backed off as if like I'm waiting for somebody else's stuff to print. And this isn't my fault. I'm just waiting because my thing is probably up next in the queue, but it was all for me. And I would take that giant bundle of papers and I would staple it together and then read it on the bus. It was beautiful. And it was before the dawn of like Math Hammer. Like we have such better things now. It's good that 1D4chan is gone, but like we have Goonhammer, which is beautiful. We have all of these great resources, YouTube channels now. Back in the day, if you wanted to know about your faction, the 1D4chan write-up was the way to learn about your faction and what people thought of it and how certain things worked. And what was great is it was written by tons of different authors, and they wouldn't delete other people's stuff. They would strike it and then put their own thoughts underneath it. And sometimes you would get articles where people are like fighting with each other, where one person's like, oh, this particular gun is awesome. And then the next person would come along, put a strike through their paragraph, write their own paragraph underneath. And then the original author would come along, strike what that other person put, and then put a new article underneath it. It was beautiful. And it was hectic. And there was lots of lore, but then there was also like weird stuff, like weird comics around Cultist Chan and just weird little stories. I remember there was like 100-page story about a normal man dating a Deathcore of Krieg woman. And that sounds like the dumbest thing because it is the dumbest thing in the entire world, but it was kind of lovely. It was weird. And that was what you could get from 1D4chan. You could get the weirdness. And so when I was I had read everything there was to read on 1D4chan. And so this was way back in the day before like you could 3D print miniatures. Like people, like this was back in the day of like the first ever printed Warhammer. This weird, ugly, red boxy dreadnought that was printed on some like college campus's tech resource plastic printer, and it looked awful. But there was a company called Shapeways. I mean, I'm sure they still exist, but you wouldn't ever do this but I purchased a Cultist Chan printed on their high detail powder printing, and it's horrible. The whole model is like covered in like a sandpapery texture. It's really, really bad, but it's just a part of my Warhammer history. The 1d4 Chan and all of the love and care that people had, and the meanness and it was a wonderful, beautiful time. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. We have better stuff now. I love Goonhammer and all that they do, and that's kind of replaced it in a lot of ways. But I will always have Cultist Chan to bring those memories back. Man, is that a crunchy model. Probably the least valuable thing in my entire collection. But speaking of things that might actually have some value, this miniature is an Inquisitor. It is actually a very, very retro Inquisitor. It is a rogue trader Inquisitor in Terminator armor, but that is not what his arms are from. So I was very surprised when I purchased this mini on eBay. I recognized it, I thought, it's probably like a second or third edition model. It looks pretty darn good. I'll purchase it. I got it really, really cheap. But as it turns out, this is an old school kit bash of some really, really rare stuff. I thought these were the original arms, but these are not the original arms. The original arms are ugly and really, really show their age, where these are actually arms from some second edition Space Marine characters. This Stormbolter arm is from the second edition Space Wolves Logan Grimnar, and then this arm with a power sword is actually the second edition Dark Angels Asmodai. So some really, really kind of rare kits went into this kit bash. I don't know where this book is from, but this book is also not meant to be on this miniature. But all of it together gives this so much history and so much story. I have a video of painting this guy up, and I actually matched the original paint job that was on this miniature because the original owner actually did a really good job painting it. And so I took his scheme and then I just recreated it as good as I could. And this is a pretty dang good miniature. Like, this does not look like a 35-year-old Warhammer miniature because nothing else from Rogue Trader holds up at all. Maybe one thing, but we'll talk about that a little later. This is a good looking miniature. You could put this down and people are like gonna think that this is maybe 15 years old, maybe 20 years old, like second edition, third edition Warhammer. But I really, really like this mini, and I think it's a really fun one to have in the collection. I just love looking at it, and I love imagining the previous owner kit bashing this together and being like, ooh, you know what, this arm would look really good, and snapping it off of their Space Wolves. Or maybe they got a lot from a friend, a bunch of just junk, and they started to put it all together. I wonder what other old Hammer kit bashes that person had. But I now have this Rogue Trader Inquisitor, and it's one of my favorite minis. It's still kind of silly and dumb looking, but I could, like, if Games Workshop took this as inspiration, like this, not the original one, this as inspiration for a new Inquisitor and Terminator armor, it would look really, really sick. But yeah, this is a 35-year-old Warhammer miniature, and I think it actually looks really, really nice. Although speaking of 35-year-old Warhammer miniatures that maybe don't look as nice, this is another old Hammer kit bash. This is a Black Templar Chaplain on bike. But the body is actually from Rogue Trader Chaplain on jet bike. Rogue Trader always had like 10 different versions of one thing, and then you ordered it for like $250 from a catalog. But this bike is a second edition Space Marine bike, very clearly taking tons of inspiration from Judge Dredd. And what was his bike called? Like the Lawbringer? It's an absolutely ridiculous winged bicycle with super, super cool, really, really dumb looking stuff all over it. But I think it all kind of works together. It bridges the gap between really ugly Rogue Trader and kind of almost starting to look decent second edition Warhammer. The bikes do not look like this anymore. It doesn't look anything like anything current or even sort of current, like Warhammer 5th edition is kind of when everything really finally solidified and has remained fairly unchanged. But this guy is weird, and I absolutely love it. And I spent so much time doing all of these fancy checkering and freehanding. He has some sort of like a knob, like a gear shift or something that has a skull on it on his bike. These saddlebags, these weirdly very, very textured wheels. I really like how this miniature turned out. And this is once again a kit bash, an old Hammer kit bash. And I think that might be the way to bring old Hammer into modern 40K, because I'll run this. I will run this in game as just a probably not a chaplain on jet, like a Primaris chaplain on bike, but definitely as a normal chaplain on bike. And it'll be so much fun to have this on the tabletop, doing work and killing Nyx orcs. And it's so old and so weird looking, but I love it. And that's the weird thing about old stuff, is I think that this is badass, but in theory, it would be much more valuable if this was the appropriate rider on the appropriate rogue trader bike, which I actually do have one, and it looks like a piece of chewed gum and it's super ugly. But if I did a good job on that, it might be a valuable model. But because this is just a bunch of random parts thrown together, it's kind of worthless. Like, I've kind of ruined it. Not that like Games Workshop models really hold value, like they hold value decently, but you shouldn't bank on it. This isn't a commodity. This is a toy. And I just think it's so much fun to bring some of that weird retroness back onto the modern tabletop. But speaking of retro and modern, these two miniatures are some of my favorite things in my collection. It is the original Rogue Trader Pewter Amble and the Blackstone Fortress Amble that was available for like 6 weeks and then was gone forever from the Games Workshop web store. But I love these miniatures because of the history. Clearly, this is what the Amble looks like. But back in the day, this wasn't lame. People didn't think that this looked stupid and dumb. This was badass. And it's so interesting to see where those design philosophies and just where just the general ideas existed back in the day 35 years ago. It looks a lot like a D&D miniature, and that might be because it was based on some D&D stuff, because originally Games Workshop was the UK distributor for this new American game called Dungeons and Dragons. And so they were very familiar with a lot of the creatures from Dungeons and Dragons. And so that's probably where the Amble came from. And they created this just 2 pieces of pewter, the head and arms, and then the butt and back. That's all there is, it's 2 pieces. But it really does tell a lovely story of this subterranean tunneling beast, a bug, bear thing. And it's lovely. And then it never went away. Like, people never really stopped caring about the Amble. The Amble is almost kind of a flagship model of Rogue Trader, or a mascot of Rogue Trader. A lot of people recognize this as an old Games Workshop miniature. And so they decided to do an amazing job of making an updated version. The modern Amble. Modern in every single way. Its proportions are identical, but completely updated. Like, where this Amble stands next to a Rogue Trader Space Marine, this Amble stands at the exact same proportions of a modern Primaris Space Marine. These 2 models are completely identical in every way but like how they actually look. They look very different, but they're very similar. And I just really like taking a look at these miniatures and analyzing them and seeing what things changed, what things stayed the same. If you look at this guy under a magnifying glass, you see the toothpick marks of how they sculpted the Green Stuff Master, where this is beautifully CAD designed and everything is absolutely perfect. But just in a fairly short amount of time, 35 years, the amazing change. And one day, is this gonna look old and dated compared to what they can do like now or in the modern times, 35 years in the future? Like, what'll that even look like? Will we all be playing 40K on holograms in Tabletop Simulator on a spaceship? Like, what? It's just, I love the history and the story told in these 2 miniatures. Decades and decades apart from one another, but yet absolutely identical. It's just really, really tickles me. I love it. And you know, as much as I love all of my actual armies that I play with in these tabletop games and have wonderful times with, the weird stuff really speaks to me. But as cool as these are, they certainly are not one of a kind. This model, however, is one of a kind, or rather it was one of a kind. This is the Squid Mage activated, and it was our first miniature. Yes, for a short period of time, we were actually making miniatures with our artist Liqerise, and she came up with this original character, and it's a very, very cool sculpt. And it was amazing seeing this idea just start out on paper and in some conversations and then end up as a real life miniature. 3D printed on a home 3D printer, and it is better in every single way than this horrible crunchy Cultist Chan. But man, I remember being so excited when this thing was finally realized and it was time for me to paint it, and I pulled an all-nighter to paint it just to the top of my ability to make sure that every single thing was perfect. And I copied Liqerise's concept art as closely as I could, and it really turned out, and I love the presence of it and the size of it and the story it tells of this mage who is nautical themed, very under the sea. But this weird idea of having the patches of this octopus be like square with all sorts of right angles, it's just a lovely, lovely thing. And I remember going mad at like 4 o'clock in the morning as I'm carefully painting this monster up to be in a video for like the next day. The Squid Mage activated. It is a wonderful, wonderful piece in my collection, and I love looking at it and just remembering the history of that day and that night and that project. And other people have this miniature and have painted it up. In fact, you can purchase the STL of this model on Comics, Games, and Things, along with also a lot of our really, really badass terrain that we make now. But man, this miniature means a lot to me. All of these weird little old stuff means a lot to me. And even though we don't make miniatures anymore, we do make, in my opinion, slightly cooler stuff. Full boards of terrain every single month. This month we have the Goblin Rave Cave, a dank, dark cave full of psychedelic mushrooms, and it is some of the largest terrain we have ever created. We also make one extra episode of Eons of Battle every single week where we take a look at our viewers' miniatures and give them some critiques and ideas of how to improve their painting. We host live Discord hangouts, painting guide PDFs, and we have a new tier where you can get your name on one of my Black Templar Space Marines and you can join the Legion. All of these miniatures are just regular, normal little toys, game pieces, but they mean so much to me, and I would love to know. Leave comments below. What are some weird oddities in your collection that are really, really meaningful to you? Because I want to know. I'm going to put these right back on the shelves in a place of prominence and just look at them some more. Thanks for watching.